On August 15th, 1971, something happened that almost nobody noticed. A short speech aired on American television.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
It sounded technical, almost boring. But in that moment, the global monetary system that had existed for decades quietly ended. Until that night, money was tied to something physical. After that night, money became something else entirely: trust. And the world we live in today is built on what replaced it. For most of human history, money was tied to something physical. Gold, silver, something scarce, something you couldn't simply create more of. But after the chaos of World War II, the global economy needed something different: stability. In 1944, representatives from 44 countries met in a quiet mountain town in New Hampshire. The meeting would become known as the Bretton Woods Conference, and the system they created would shape the global economy for the next 3 decades. The idea was simple. Currencies around the world would be tied to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be tied to gold: $35 for 1 ounce. That meant every currency in the system had an indirect link to gold. The chain looked like this: your currency, to the dollar, to gold. And the reason this system worked was because of the United States. After World War II, America held the majority of the world's gold reserves. Factories were intact, industry was booming, and the dollar quickly became the center of global finance. Trade between countries was settled in dollars. Central banks held dollars as reserves. And for the first time in modern history, the global economy ran on a shared monetary foundation. But there was something fragile hidden inside this system. Because the same country responsible for supplying the world with dollars was also responsible for keeping those dollars tied to gold. And over time, that balance became impossible. The post-war economy was expanding rapidly. Global trade was growing. Countries needed more dollars to facilitate that trade. More goods, more commerce, more money moving across borders. And because the dollar sat at the center of the system, the United States had to provide those dollars. In other words, the world depended on America to print money. But here was the problem. Every dollar in circulation was supposed to be backed by gold, $35 per ounce. And the more dollars the United States issued, the harder it became to maintain that promise. Economists would later give this problem a name: the Triffin dilemma. It described a simple contradiction. For the global economy to grow, the United States needed to supply more dollars. But the more dollars it supplied, the weaker the gold backing became. The system needed dollars to survive, but those same dollars were slowly undermining the system itself. For a while, the imbalance stayed hidden. The world trusted the dollar. Gold remained in American vaults, and the system kept moving forward. But by the 1960s, the pressure started to build. During the 1960s, the United States began spending at an unprecedented scale. Part of that spending came from war. The Vietnam War had become one of the most expensive military conflicts in American history. At the same time, the government was expanding social programs at home. Under President Lyndon B. Johnson, the United States launched an ambitious set of domestic initiatives known as the Great Society. Healthcare programs, education programs, anti-poverty programs. The government was fighting a war abroad while funding massive social investment at home. And all of it required money. More money than the existing system had been designed to support. To fund these programs, the United States issued more dollars flowing into the global economy, more dollars circulating outside American borders. And slowly, something began to change. Other countries started noticing the imbalance. They realized that the number of dollars in circulation was growing much faster than the gold reserves meant to support them. Among the most vocal critics was the French president Charles de Gaulle. De Gaulle openly questioned the fairness of the system. Why, he asked, should the United States have the privilege of printing the world's reserve currency? France began exchanging its dollar reserves for gold, literally shipping dollars back to the United States and demanding gold in return. And they weren't the only ones. Other countries began doing the same. Gold started leaving American vaults. Confidence began to erode, and the foundation of the Bretton Woods system started to crack. By the early 1970s, the world was holding far more dollars than the United States could ever convert into gold. The promise at the center of the global monetary system was becoming impossible to keep. And eventually, the system would reach a breaking point. By the early 1970s, the Bretton Woods system was under enormous strain. Gold reserves in the United States were falling, foreign governments were increasingly skeptical, and the number of dollars circulating around the world had grown far beyond the gold meant to support them. The system still existed, but everyone could feel the pressure building. Then, on August 15, 1971, the United States made a decision that would change the global monetary system overnight. That evening, President Richard Nixon appeared on American television. Most viewers expected another routine political announcement. Instead, Nixon delivered a series of emergency economic measures. Among them was one sentence that would reshape the entire financial system. The United States would suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
In simple terms, foreign governments could no longer exchange dollars for gold. The link between money and metal was broken. This moment would later be called the Nixon shock. At the time, Nixon described the move as temporary, a short-term measure meant to stabilize the economy. But the gold window never reopened. The Bretton Woods system had effectively ended, and for the first time in modern history, the global financial system was no longer tied to gold at all. Currencies would now float against each other. Money would no longer be anchored to a physical resource. Instead, it would be anchored to trust. Once the connection to gold disappeared, the rules of the monetary system changed dramatically. Under the old system, gold acted as a constraint. Governments could not create unlimited money because every dollar ultimately pointed back to a finite resource. But in the new system, those limits were gone. Money was now fiat currency, money backed not by gold, but by the authority of governments and central banks. This gave policymakers something they had never truly had before: flexibility. Central banks could expand the money supply during recessions. Governments could borrow more freely. Financial markets could grow much larger. And in many ways, the system worked. Global trade expanded. Financial markets deepened. The modern credit economy began to take shape. But the new system also carried a different kind of risk. Without the discipline imposed by gold, debt levels began to rise. Asset prices began climbing faster. Financial markets became increasingly central to economic life. The economy was no longer just about factories and production. It was also about credit, about leverage, about financial assets. The world had entered the age of modern finance. Over the decades that followed, the consequences of this shift became more visible. Global debt expanded dramatically. Asset markets, stocks, housing, and real estate, grew far larger than they had been in the past. Financial institutions gained enormous influence over the economy, and central banks became some of the most powerful institutions in the world. The new system allowed governments to respond more aggressively to crises. Recessions could be met with stimulus. Central banks could lower interest rates. Money could be created in ways that would have been impossible under a strict gold system. But that flexibility also meant the system depended heavily on trust. Trust in governments, trust in central banks, trust that the value of money would be protected. In the modern economy, money no longer derives its value from metal locked inside a vault. It derives its value from belief in the institutions that manage it. And as long as that trust exists, the system continues to function. Most people never think about the monetary system they live inside. Money feels simple. You earn it, you spend it, you save it. But the rules that govern money shape almost everything else in the economy. They influence interest rates, they influence inflation, they influence the cost of housing, the price of assets, and the availability of credit. The world we live in today, the one defined by global markets, expanding debt, and central bank policy, is a direct result of the changes that began in 1971. When the gold window closed, money didn't disappear, but its foundation changed. The constraints of the old system were replaced by the flexibility of a new one, and that shift continues to influence economic life around the world. On the surface, August 15, 1971 looked like just another Sunday evening political announcement, a short televised speech, a package of technical economic measures. Most Americans tuned in expecting news about inflation, jobs, or the wage price freeze. Few realized they were watching a quiet revolution in how money itself would work for decades to come. In reality, it marked the end of one monetary era and the beginning of another. And whether we realize it or not, every financial decision we make today exists inside the world that decision created. One quiet Sunday night changed how money works forever. It's tempting to look at 1971 and think that's the moment everything changed. But money has always evolved. Long before the modern financial system, society struggled with the same problem. How do you create money without creating too much of it? During the American Revolution, the Continental Congress printed paper currency to fund the war. At first, it worked, but over time, too much was issued, and its value collapsed. Centuries earlier, in China, some of the first paper money systems faced the same challenge. Money made more convenient, but also easier to overproduce. And even in the Roman Empire, the value of money didn't always stay constant. Coins were gradually reduced in precious metal content. Less silver, same face, same denomination, but less value. Different systems, different centuries, same underlying tension. The story of money has always been a story of trust and limits. 1971 wasn't the first time that balance shifted, and it won't be the last. If anything, it's just one chapter in a much longer story, one that we're still living through, and maybe one worth exploring further. I'm the Uneducated Economist. Thanks for watching.